Okay, so let's get started with this webinar. So good afternoon, everybody. Good to seeing everybody online. My name is Hans-Jürgen Schönig. Just call me Hans. And for the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to guide you through a topic which has been even more important this year than it used to be the years before. So today we're going to talk about migration from Postgres, from Oracle to Postgres for the purpose of saving costs, but also for the purpose of achieving some other interesting goals we're looking at here. But let's get started. So thank you everybody for showing up. I've been in professional Postgres for over 20 years, so I think I'm already senior, which basically means I'm old. So let's get started with this topic here. So let me see that's chat open. Okay, everybody can hear me. Perfect. So briefly about us. We've been running Postgres for over 20 years, so we have a lot of experience in this field. We are pretty international these days, and we are, as you might know, highly specialized on Postgres. Our service portfolio includes, but is not limited to, Postgres support, which means we got a 24/7 hotline. We got training courses on a regular basis. We do consultancy, performance tuning, Postgres high availability, clustering, etc. But we recently also expanded into the area of data science, which means artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, etc., etc. So in short, we are a data company. So we're mostly focused on data. So we are quite international these days. So we got offices in Poland, Switzerland, Estonia, Austria, Mauritius, South Africa, and our Latin American division in Uruguay and Buenos Aires. So we also got a couple of customers. You might know them: Amazon, HP, BMW, Porsche, Nokia. You name them, we are there. So I guess we're quite international here. So let's get started. As far as the agenda is concerned, we will cover various aspects of this whole migration topic. So first of all, I want to focus your attention on why somebody might want to use Postgres. Secondly, why the transition to Postgres makes sense in the first place. And finally, how you can facilitate those changes and how you can get things done in the most efficient way possible. So there are various options in all those areas, and let's see how we can achieve them and how we can get there. So, first topic of the day: why Postgres? So let me show you some simple graph which I found recently on DB Engines. As you might know, DB Engines is a website which tries to measure database, let's say database market shares, or how much people like a certain database or so. And if you look at the top, we got the market leader, which is Oracle, MySQL, and MS SQL. But if you look closely, Postgres has been growing constantly over the years, and we see this going up and up and up and up. I recently spoke to some folks at Amazon in Seattle. We went there to do some consultancy, and they told me that that Postgres is the fastest growing service on their platform. So it's not just some abstract website that's going to give you this data, but it's really also those guys are really running thousands of Postgres instances. Also see that the trend is up there. So I got the feeling that it's not a technology you're gonna miss tomorrow. It's certainly a technology which is growing and which is becoming more popular. And hopefully someday we're going to overtake the Oracle guys in terms of market penetration. So it's looking good, put it that way. So Um, so why would anybody go for Postgres? So obviously it's been open source for forever, basically since 1980 something. So we're looking at the long and extensive history of development. We got no licensing costs. Of course, you've seen there's a lot of extensibility there, and also I think we can safely say that we're a solid database and we're a scalable database. But let's look in detail. So because many things are not only about price. Price is one thing, but you really get to see those things in context. So price is only one thing. If price was the only factor, nobody would drink beer in the restaurant. Everybody would go to the grocery store to buy beer. But obviously, there's a value in drinking beer at the restaurant, and the same with databases. So price is by far not the only argument anymore. So it's there's more to that than just price. And let's elaborate a bit on that. So why does moving make sense in the first place? First argument is of course cost cutting. I mean, during COVID or just during normal times, I mean, price does matter. I mean, there's no question about it. Price is an issue, but there's also the notion of technical independence, which I would like to focus on. It's about learning, it's about flexibility, it's about data protection, investment protection, and it's also about incomplete information. And then let me show you in a minute what I mean by incomplete information, right? Cost cutting. So that's obvious. I mean, everybody wants to save money. Everybody wants to pocket some money. That's obvious. But it's not only about that, which I'm going to show you. So in the absence of value, price becomes an issue. You can see this quote on my desk every day. Um, if you're looking at something, why are people willing to invest into something? Why is somebody willing to purchase a lorry? Why is somebody going to purchase a building, etc.? At some point, there has to be value. I mean, if you can rent out an apartment for $1,000, but they're going to charge you 100 million to purchase it, in the absence of value, price becomes an issue, right? Or if you cannot live there, or for whatever reason. And the same is true for databases on a broader scale, because you can charge a license fee, but if the license fee does not reflect additional value anymore, then you're in trouble. And I think that's the problem we're seeing at the moment in the Oracle market, that the price tag is high, but people start to have problems seeing the value, right? Because they're going to see Postgres works perfectly, does everything you want, easy to deploy, readily available. You can create new stuff on the web in 2 minutes. And on the other side, you still need five days to install an Oracle cluster. So obviously, people are not willing to take this infinitely, right? And I think this cost aspect is nicely shown in Larry's parking garage. This one we found that one when they started to license their virtual machines in a nice way. And what it says, you can't charge me 5 million, and the answer is, well, you could have parked everywhere, right? So the value was lost at some point. Cost comparison. What we saw practically, people keep bugging me for this data, and this is obviously not the whole truth. Uh, but it's pretty close. So what we see here is basically something like an 80% improvement, and I would say that this is reasonably true. So if we're looking at the average customer around the corner, I would say that the 80% cost saving in terms of total cost of ownership, I would consider that to be pretty realistic. So this is not a marketing figure some wonderful person came up with, but that's what I would say is an honest number, because nothing is free. um, I would say that we're talking about a reasonable assumption if we're talking about minus 80%. Okay. uh, Secondly, what we saw is that migration is always a win. I just saw one exception where migration was not a win, but that was with old Oracle prices. And it was a single server running 300,000 lines of stored procedure code. I mean, in this case, I mean, you're lost. There's no way. It's better to start from scratch there. But I think that was the only exception I saw. Otherwise, migration is always a win. And what you see in most cases is that this stuff starts to pay off pretty quickly. So if we had one case where implementing a new feature into Postgres was actually cheaper than licensing an Oracle server. So this cost effectiveness can usually, I mean, usually first year, second year, and you're already in the promised land, I would say. So it's usually always a win. But let's talk about something else. Technical independence. This is the amount of data which is known to be stored by mankind uh, up to the year 2025. And as you see, the amount of data we're talking about is basically an exponential curve, right? So data is growing, and I don't see a future where the amount of data is not growing. I mean, in 5 years, we will be watching 3D video, and your sewage system is going to send data on every second. So data is going to grow. We're going to have more Internet of Things, etc. So data is going to grow. So in other words, you're hooked on data. You're dependent on data. So if you're dependent on data, it's maybe not a good idea to depend on your database vendor, right? It's like developing a nice heroin addiction over time. So obviously you cannot get rid of this stuff, and you keep purchasing it. Someday, at some point, it's gonna kill you. So technical independence is super important if you're hooked on data. Data is the gold of the future. It's the currency of the present. It's the currency of the future, and it's not gonna go away, right? Oil was the currency of the past. Data is the currency of the present and the future. It's not gonna go away. No chance. So technical independence is also an argument, because let's suppose you're running 5,000 Oracle servers, and what you want is you want to renegotiate your license deal. I mean, if I'm selling you 5,000 machines, I'm not going to negotiate the price with you. I'm just going to dictate the price with you, right? So that's the situation I want to bring your attention here. So technical independence does have value. If you have 20,000 commercial databases in the field and you cannot change them easily, I mean, I can give you any price you're going to purchase, because it's not a price negotiation. You're able to dictate the price. So if you're building up a large organization, or if you already have one, technical independence, vendor locking, etc., it does have value that you don't depend on a commercial closed source product. Because if something is open source, if you shoot every single Postgres developer in the world, if it's open source with reasonable effort, you could still continue running this thing for 50 years if you want. If you depend on somebody supporting a product which is outphased and blah blah blah, I mean, it's game over. I mean, you're under control, right? And that's not the way to run a big enterprise, is to depend on somebody, right? Second thing is, I recently checked the Postgres documentation, and if I take a reasonable set of documentation about Postgres, we're talking about 4,500 pages. So we're talking about some relevant extensions and Postgres itself. So let's say it's 4,500 pages. Um, the size of the Oracle documentation is maybe 50,000 pages. So one could argue that Postgres is not nicely documented, which is actually not true. It's very nicely documented. But the point is, obviously, we got 45,000 pages containing stuff that might be either too complicated or just too much or not needed, whatever. So in Postgres, many things are a lot easier than in a commercial database, right? So, for example, if you want to install it, if you want to make it highly available, if you want to do this kind of stuff, in many cases you can learn in Postgres a lot faster. And secondly, how can you learn? If you are a 15-year-old living at home, you can have a computer, you can go to the internet, you can get yourself a nice React tutorial, and you can start to implement websites. It's perfectly feasible. If you're a 15-year-old and you want to learn SAP R3, or if you want to learn SAP HANA, or if you want to learn how to build a cellular network, it's not that easy because you don't have access to this information. You cannot just easily test SIBO, or you cannot just easily run, I don't know, some IBM mainframe, right? So the entrance level to learn Postgres is a lot lower. You can learn it a lot more easily, and you have higher chances that you find somebody who likes the technology, who is interested in the technology, and has a decent level of self-education. I mean, we see that on Linux every day. You get people coming out of school knowing how to run Linux. You got people who just sat on their bottom and learned it. You're not going to find that with AIX because nobody has a chance to actually do that without an even more lengthy and costly process, right? So learning is an issue. Learning is an issue. And secondly, things are open source. I mean, one might argue that you're not going to need this anyway because you're just running pre-made packages. Why do you care about the source code? But the point is, we care about the source code because we, as a support company for Postgres, if you got a problem, we can look it up for you. We cannot look up stuff in the Oracle optimizer and become infinitely clever because it's closed source. We can look up stuff in the Postgres optimizer. We can look up stuff in the storage engine. We can check syntax. We can fix bugs for you. I mean, if you find a bug in Oracle, I mean, you have to beg and pray that somebody is going to fix it for you, right? In Postgres, we can do it for you. Or if you got a large organization with a couple hundred people, you've got very high chances that somebody is actually capable of solving a problem because he can look it up, he can fix it, he can submit a patch. We can help doing that. It's totally impossible with closed source. If you find a bug in IBM mainframe, well, you got a bug in IBM mainframe. That's it, right? Maybe it's fixed in 10,000 years. Next thing is flexibility. Let me tell you a story. I flew to South Africa on 27th of February this year. And when I returned on 18th of March, Europe was a war zone, basically. So everybody was scared. Nobody wanted to go to the supermarket. Everybody was scared of Corona. Everybody was afraid, right? So within 3 weeks, the whole world changed. Everything changed. So imagine you want to purchase yourself some IBM DB2 licenses, right? So on 18th of March, you got the nice idea. I need 10 DB2 licenses and 5 Informix licenses, and I need a price for some SAP deployment. And by the way, we want a solution next week. I mean, you're not even going to be able to purchase the bloody licenses. We're not even talking about deploying them. You won't even be able to get a price for that in many cases. And this is why flexibility matters. I mean, if you want to run the Linux machine, I mean, just run the Linux machine. If you got the hardware or if you got the virtual machine, just run it. Nobody cares about licenses. Nobody cares about this stuff. You got the flexibility to run it, which means you got the flexibility to expand, you got the flexibility to change, you got the flexibility to remove, you got the flexibility to support, and it's easy if you're going large scale. I mean, try to deploy 50,000 Oracle things in the field. I mean, the administration is going to be way higher than the deployment process, most likely. And in Postgres, it's the other way around. Deploying and getting the infrastructure is harder than getting your commercials right because it's a lot easier. So flexibility is an issue. It's not just price, it's not just we are the faster database anymore. It's also an issue of flexibility, technical independence, knowledge, availability of skilled labor. It's a lot more than just price. Price is one component. I mean, if everything was about price, nobody would drink Coca-Cola because everybody would go for water, right? Flexibility matters. So how long does it take to get a price for 10,000 IBM cores, right? Or Informix or whatever. I don't consider it to be very customer friendly. I remember I tried to get a price for two Informix servers. I failed after 3 days. So that's not necessarily agile development, I would say. Protect your investments. You cannot purchase Postgres. You can purchase IBM. You can purchase Microsoft if you got sufficient amounts of money. You can purchase basically everything. But you cannot purchase something that is not owned by a company. And that's a big distinction between Postgres and many other products, that you cannot purchase a company and then own it. Recently, a Postgres support company got bought up by some other Postgres support company. And what happened basically was that the core team of Postgres is going to change because there is an agreement that no single company should basically own more than 50% of developers, right? So there's a built-in protection that you cannot be basically bought up and the product is outphased or something. That's not going to happen. And we as a support company, we never outphase at all. So we always support stuff infinitely. But if we're talking about long-term investment, that makes sense. I mean, let me tell you about a real long-term investment. The American Navy put out a support contract for an operating system for 50 years because they wanted to run it on an aircraft carrier, right? So the lifespan of an aircraft carrier is 50 years. So they procured Microsoft Windows support for 50 years, right? So I would say that an aircraft carrier is a reasonably safe investment. It's going to float for a while. So we're talking about extremely long run times in some cases. I mean, we saw life insurances, they're going to run for 50 years, 60 years, right? So if you go really long term, you need to protect your investments and you got to make sure that the damn thing is going to be around in 20 years from now, right? So I wouldn't underestimate that. It's not a pricing thing, it's a protection thing, right? So how do you do this migration? So now that everybody is hopefully convinced that this is the way to go, how would you actually go about it, right? And first of all, you got to see what's going on there. Secondly, we got to talk about stored procedures, moving the data, adapting your applications, and then just make sure that the quality management is in place. So how do you do that? So we got a couple of solutions here. First of all, if you're moving from Oracle, which seems to be the standard sports of the day, basically the biggest challenge in many cases is null handling. And we also saw some issues the other day with merge, connect by, synonyms, etc. So all those database specific things are certainly something to watch out for. For most stuff, there's going to be a counterpart in Postgres, but there are some things which are really just completely different with no counterparts. But that's usually quite an exception. So once you're over those basic things, and especially with Oracle, null handling is an issue, then you should be able to basically fix most of those things anymore. Next question is downtime. Can you afford downtime? So is it basically possible to take down your system for a couple of hours? And obviously, next stuff is security and also obfuscation. So if you got 50 million users, obviously you cannot take a database backup and give it to the next guy and assume that you can just pass on all the private data. So a migration process is also downtime management, security management, and having a decent amount of data protection, meaning how do you create test data for your developers so that they can develop their stuff safely without compromising any of those security things, right? So the way we do that, uh, we used this Oracle Migrator for many, many years, this Ora2PG, right? So we used Ora2PG for many years. And I remember I was sitting at a client near Cologne some time ago, and up to lunchtime, I think I filed 3 bug reports. And I was so angry because when I'm sitting at a customer, I'm usually not sitting there alone. I'm watched by 10 people. So you sit there, you're doing something, you're watched by 10 people because they're supposed to learn something. And what you're doing is constantly fixing or filing bug reports for a tool you just recommended 2 hours earlier. So that's not very satisfactory. I can promise you. So I decided let's create something more professional. And what we built is basically the Cybertech Migrator, which has very efficient ways to move data, very flexible. We can do data structures, indexes, constraints, foreign keys, etc. We can change data on the fly, so we can basically have a subset of data. We have zero downtime migration, which means that while the migration is running, we can still capture the changes on the Oracle side and apply it during migration. We also have the chance to rewrite stored procedures automatically. So we're working together with a partner here, and I think we are able to convert something along the lines of 80% of the stored procedure code can be migrated automatically. The rest is always going to be uh, a um, manual process, right? So nothing is fully out of the box. You will always have to change data type here. You always have to rewrite the procedure there. So, but I would say that on the data side, we're 95% perfect. On the stored procedure side, I think we should be able to capture something like 80%. But again, you have to see a migration process is also a cleanup process. So you can basically also see it as a way um, to change data types. Like instead of car1, you want Boolean. In case of numeric, you might want floating point, or you might exclude some columns or something like that. So a migration process is also a cleanup process, and that's going to give you a lot of flexibility on this side. So to sum it up, uh, what this tool does is it can automatically convert schemas, we can do code rewrite, and we can do change capture, so that we can basically have something like close to zero downtime during the migration. So to do that, we have hopefully a fairly intelligent data type mapping, which we took from the Oracle Foreign Data Wrapper. Postgres has many more data types than, say, Oracle or Sybase. So what I counted the other day was 97 types without extensions, so just the base types. The migrator engine to move the data itself, it's a little C program which is super efficient. We did a test the other day at a major financial institution, and what we reached was 1.2 gigabytes per second on this test system just for moving the data. And I think we ran into a limitation on the Oracle side or network, so certainly not on the destination. But I would say that 1.2 gigabytes per second is already a damn fast migration. So that means 70 gigabytes per minute. That's I mean that's a lot already. Yeah, moving indexes. Postgres has more index types than Oracle. So if you're moving indexes, you can go with the default migration, but I encourage you to make some adjustments here to use the full power of Postgres, because when you install all the extensions and all this stuff you can find on the web, if I'm not mistaken, we're talking about 11 types of indexes which I found over the years, right? So it's not just B trees anymore. I think it's if the number I found is correct, we're talking about 11 different types of indexes. Right? So how can we help you? How can we facilitate changes for you? So first of all, we got the tool chain to actually do it. We got the support services to help you during the migration. And obviously, we do have 20 years of expertise in the area. So we have done this before. That's what I'm trying to say. Um, yeah, long-term support. We've seen systems which have been running for 20 years plus. I remember a database in Spain. It was about the ERA database on a British telescope on the Canarian Islands. They produced several minutes of downtime because somebody accidentally turned off the machine, right? So after 14 years, they had accidental downtime because somebody pulled the wrong plug. So that's what I consider to be long term. If the first downtime happens after this long period of time, just because of a mistake. And this is not something uncommon. I mean, if you have a truck, it's gonna go around Europe for various years, then it's shipped abroad where it's still gonna drive for 50 years. So that's pretty long-term thing. And we as a company, we try to be long-term, right? So we are not looking for a 5-minute revenue. We're really in for the long shot. So we can certainly help you in order to do this long-term support. So in other words, we don't do outphasing or something like that. So we just try to be as long-term as we potentially can. We used to support Postgres 8 10 years ago. So what stops us from supporting it today? I mean, we know the code base, it's the same people. So why would you outphase if customers still need the service? If you also see internal resources as long term. So if you don't treat your colleagues as a cost center, but as a competence center, there is no reason to change anything here. So summary. To sum it up, migration does pay off. So you won't see a realistic case where migration is not going to pay off on the database side. It's absolutely, in my judgment, it's inconceivable, especially if you're coming from Oracle. You can count on long-term support, so you cannot purchase Postgres and just turn it off. It's not going to happen. It's easier to produce skilled labor than you would have it on the Oracle side, and of course, you can always rely on a support partner for 24/7 support. So we are ready for that. And finally, are there any questions from your side? I mean, I also encourage you to answer to ask some technical questions. So if there's anything on your mind you don't agree with, or if there's any question out of some practical need, just feel free to put it into the chat, and I'm gonna answer them if you don't mind. So any questions from your side?